is not fitting in. Your work, I feel like your work kind of goes in a couple of different directions, but it's playing on kind of the same motif, which is, I believe you had, put it down as, or had mentioned it as being wanting the viewer to question the veracity of the image.
Absolutely. I mean, during most of my career, what I have done or what people have thought I've done has been photography. However, way back during my undergraduate years, I never went out and took a picture of anything. Mm-hmm. You could in no ways consider me a documentarian. I manufactured things in the studio from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Set up things, costumed people, mm-hmm. Acted much more like a director than a photographer. And the thing that fascinated me in the early years about photography is that you could, and this is before digital when I entered it, but that you could present somebody a photograph mm-hmm. and they would accept it as fact, when in fact you could fake it as easily as you could fake anything else. Now, that we're firmly in the digital age, people are aware of that. But back then, when you looked at things like ghost photographs or mm-hmm. UFO photographs or right. Bigfoot photographs, especially ghost photographs are incredible to me because, mm-hmm. Obviously people weren't aware of what a light leak was in a camera.
Right.
And so they would show you a picture and there was a light leak on the negative. Mm-hmm. But, somebody saw that as grandma, right. At the top of the stairs. But it was part of the, what the viewer brings to the photograph in accepting what you're telling them as mm-hmm. truth. And so everything I've done over the course of the past 30 years has followed that same idea.
Okay.
And questioning the veracity of the photographic image is part of it, but it's much more in the case of questioning what is real and what is not real and what we accept to be reality.
Sure.
And what's odd about, that stream of my work is that now more than ever in this environment, it's become relevant.
Right. And, I just think in terms of our culture, I listened to a number of podcasts, and I can't remember if it was exactly which one. It was like a TED Talk or something. They were talking about how they are creating, they've created artificial intelligence in computer programs that are adept enough to be able to sample audio and video and alter, have a visual image and, in what's relatively real time, totally change the words that are coming out of someone's mouth in video.
Yes.
Right. And so
it's amazing and beyond frightening.
Right. And so, they show it to, they were like, okay, let's test, have a test group here of people and here's this video clip. And they're like, wow, I'm really surprised that person said that. Well, they didn't, they kind of on the fly can stick whatever they want in there, which is kind of really frightening in terms of what people's ability to filter out what the truth is. I think is a really hot topic right now, and I think it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. I mean, we're just seeing the beginnings of it, but.
And I'm not trying to say that you have added to that.
No. I just think it's.
But it means that your art's very topical, right? I mean,
finally, yes.
Right. But so when I look at your work today, my impression is that a lot of your process is digital. But on our timeline, 30 years ago, I doubt you were using Photoshop.
No. Actually, I was a latecomer to Photoshop. The first work that really got me attention in my first big gallery was work where I got really frustrated when people learned that something was a photograph, they would immediately go back to, well, what lens did you use? What camera did you use? What paper is this printed on? And they would never look at the subject matter. And so I had this idea of maybe I should try to take pictures of nothing.
Right.
Or take pictures that, totally remove that sort of line of questioning out. And so what I did is I started making very simple drawings. I made drawings of lines, drawings of dots,
right,
collections of dots, and I would photograph them with my 4x5 camera. If you're familiar with what a 4x5 camera is, it's got the bellows, and you put your head under the hood. And I would photograph these drawings as badly as I possibly could. I would either horribly overexpose, underexpose, go as far out of focus as I could, hit the camera during exposure, shake it. And what was amazing is that the resulting image that came out was wildly different and unpredictable.
Right.
And I was entering into this collaboration with the photographic process where I really didn't know what I was going to get, but I was willing to accept it.
Right.
Then once that photograph was taken, I destroyed the drawing. And then once I printed one image off the negative, I destroyed the negative. And what I ended up with is this strange hybrid that when somebody asked, is it a photograph or is it a drawing? I could answer yes.
Right.
Yes, it is.
So that, in my mind, what we're really talking about here is that really a question of why do we even try to categorize who we are as artists? I mean, because to me, that's really saying that you are an artist. You're not necessarily a photographer, because a lot of what you're doing there is grounded in mark making. Right?
Totally. And I did look at these, personally, I always looked at them as paintings.
Right.
I was working in the medium of photography, but I was doing a lot of things that would give a photographer an aneurysm. And enjoying that process of finding out what sort of mark you could make with light.
Right. And so, your process, the evolution of your work progresses. I thought it was interesting when you talk about what things you really gravitated towards as a child. You mentioned history. You mentioned photography. There's a point where those things start, really becoming parts of your work, right?
Yes,
I mean, you can really kind of see that.
Well, I can add to that in that the photographers that were hugely influential on me were never considered artists in their lifetime. They were documentarians.
Right.
Some of them historical documentarians, some of them just very eccentric, odd documentarians. If you look at Karl Blossfeld, Eugene Auger, Baldus.
Those early French.
Auger trying to document the Paris he knew as it was disappearing.
Right.
And doing it within the limitations of using a lens that was actually too small for the film base, which gives us that look that we now associate with Auger. The great documentarians of the American West, O'Sullivan, Jackson, Watkins especially. These people were documentarians, but we look at their work now as the hallmark of the aesthetics of modern photography. They were just fascinating to me. And historically, as well as just aesthetically, and so that connection with history, is pretty pronounced even on that level.
Sure. And so, in your, like I said, your work kind of goes in. I think you can agree that it's kind of distinctly two different, currently two different aesthetics. But one of those aesthetics, is. It's reminiscent of tintype. It's grainy. There's a narrative, and
unabashedly romantic.
Right. And in some of those, and I don't know I think you've already mentioned some inspirations there, but when I'm looking at especially the work that has like some semblance of a tall ship in the background and the icebergs, it really reminds me of some of these exploration photos that came back from Shackleton's journeys to Antarctica. I mean, it really kind of feels like, end of the world, here we are out, battling.
Yeah.
Well,
those were absolutely overt influences, without a doubt. I would also say that pictorialism was a huge influence, and that was a movement in photography that I found absolutely fascinating during my undergraduate and graduate years, and the professors tried to beat it out of you. Mm-hmm. They saw that as a very forced period in photography, and yes, it was, but that doesn't make it bad. Back when I was an undergrad and grad, people still talked about the zone system and the perfectly exposed photograph, and what do we take photographs of and what do we not take photographs of? And I always went against that. I found that boring.
Right.
I found the things that a camera could do far more interesting than what it had the ability to record or not record.
Right. And so, I think there's so much photography that you see, especially if you go to an art street fair. You see so much high resolution, high saturation photography that is so far from where your aesthetic is.
Well, not only that, in the art world, if you visit Basel, Miami, or the Armory show, you're going to see giant photographs that are extremely in focus of buildings in ruin, or fields in ruin, or people in ruin, or just it hasn't changed that much. There's still that fetish of being able to see everything with a photograph. It's sort of like when high definition newscasts started coming out, and you started seeing the pores of the newscasters, and they started freaking out. They were having chemical peels, and they were doing facelifts and stuff because the camera just keeps getting more able to record more detail than we can see. And it goes back to the fact that we're taught how to see based on viewing photographs, when in fact we do not see reality at all in the way that a photograph presents itself. So when you look at these hyper detailed photographs, they're interesting, but they're not reality in any form or fashion.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that comes up in my painting classes. I'm having to remind my students that even if you're using a photo reference, a photo is not how your eye sees. And that, the best paintings will have found and lost edges because you're needing to direct your viewer to where you want your point of emphasis to be. And, that naturally, if you are focusing on some place, just in my engaging eye contact with you, my focus, your eyes are going to be a lot more in focus than the things around you. But if we're looking at a photo, everything's in focus, but that's really not how we see.
Absolutely, and not only is everything in focus, but everything occurs at the exact same instant. And a painting is much more about the passage of time and seeing something more from memory than experience. Photographs haven't done a lot of damage to how we view reality, but they've certainly made it myopic in how we think the world appears.
Right.
Hockney had done some incredible research where he gave up painting for a number of years to talk about photography and lenses' early impact on late medieval and early Renaissance painting, which people are still loath to accept when it's so glaringly obvious on so many levels, especially if you have the background in photography. You're able to see a lot of these things that people with a background in painting aren't able to see. but it influences so much what we think we see.